evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to CPR Dialogues 2022, to this panel discussion on how Indians view India and the world. It's a discussion based on the CPR C-Voter survey. The structure for this panel discussion is going to be like this. We will start with presentation by Rahul Verma, Fellow, the Politics Initiative at CPR, after which there will be a launch of the report based on the findings of the CPR C-Voter survey. This will be followed by a panel discussion. The panelists for this evening will be Shrayana Bhattacharya, Senior Social Protection Economist, World Bank, India; Yashwant Deshmukh, Founder, C-Voter; Pallavi Raghavan, Assistant Professor, International Relations, Ashoka University; Gary Shi, I'm sorry if I got the surname wrong, India Bureau Chief, Washington Post. I hope you have a very productive discussion this evening. I'd like to invite Rahul for his presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. What I'm going to do in 8 to 10 minutes, basically give you a broad stroke of findings from this survey, which was conducted jointly with C-Voter Foundation. And the reason we thought to do this survey, to take a stock of 75 years since a momentous time in the history of South Asia. Rarely you would see a moment when both celebration as well as horror takes place at the same time. So August 1947 was one of those months where people from India and Pakistan can celebrate their independence from British. But also because there was so much of tragedy and movement of people from this side of the border to that side. Millions were killed, millions were displaced. And so the idea was, through this survey, to take a stock of things in India, Pakistan, as well as in Bangladesh. Today, we are basically going to talk about the findings from the India survey. Bangladesh survey is complete. Pakistan survey, unfortunately, got stuck due to floods, but hopefully, later this year or early next year, we'll come up with comparative findings from 3 countries. The setting of this room looks like a classroom. So welcome to the class. And if you do want to, after a good lunch, sleep, I'll just give you a 3-minute summary of the presentation. So big picture. And after that, bear with us, which is Indians celebrate their democracy, proud of the progress that the country has made in 75 years. They trust their public institutions and show immense faith in their leadership, yet they are introspective and reflective. And I think that's the main finding of this survey, because while being celebratory, they have concerns over economic situation, safety of underprivileged groups, growing influence of business, and increasing centralization in politics. So in some ways, Indians are, you could say these are contradictory findings, but in some ways, this is what Indians are. They are basically celebrating, yet being reflective of things that is going on in this country. For next 5 minutes, I'm going to just pick some broad findings from the survey, and then I'll invite my co-panelists to reflect on these things. The survey, if it's like, just to make sure that this survey is representative, it has data from all states of India. We interviewed 5,815 people. That was the final sample size. And largely the sample is representative of population by different demographic categories. So what is the progress, or what are the progresses India has made, and what are the concerns? So we asked people how much India has progressed in 75 years in these fields, in science and technology, national security, education and health facilities, infrastructure, economic growth, and status of underprivileged groups. So a majority of Indians, more than 2/3, feel that India has made significant progress across sectors. There is high institutional trust. They trust institutions of army, they trust institutions of parliament, Supreme Court, election commission. There are some concerns, but overall, robust institutional trust. But Indians are concerned about growing poverty, unemployment, and they are circumspect about economic prospect, both at the national level as well as their own family's economic situation in next few years. Similarly, there is concern about the safety of underprivileged groups, including religious minorities. One very interesting finding from this survey is this. We asked people, if you get a chance to join politics or contest an election, would you like to do that? So 1/3 of Indians do say that if they get a chance, they would like to contest election. But what is more interesting, and something I would like my panelists to reflect on, that lower strata wants to join politics more, right? They are basically saying, they are showing signs of political ambition. Now, you could have different takes on why this political ambition among the lower strata. It could be a very, very interesting thing, because so far from the developed world, we know that political ambition is directly correlated with higher socioeconomic status. But even in the political segment, we see paradoxes. The first paradox, and all of you know that turnout in India has been increasing, going up, but political participation, except electoral activities, remains low. So going out on the street to protest, signing protests, those things remain low. Second, Indians believe they have a high vote efficacy, which is, if you ask people, do you think your vote makes a difference in how affairs of this country is run? People do say that their vote has an effect. But they don't think that they have a voice to alter or change the system. So both these findings are there. They do so concerns over increasing dynasticism and centralization in politics. Third, we did ask questions, and I'm just showing one part of this, which is, do you think the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947 was a right decision or a wrong decision? And the opinion on that question is divided. 46% people think that it's a right decision, and 36% people said it was a wrong decision. We dissected the data through various categories, and it's natural that younger population thinks that it was a right decision. The older population thinks it was a wrong decision. Similarly, if we ask them, and it is a hypothetical question which is always difficult to answer, that suppose there is some sort of reunion or reunification between these two nations come about, would you support something like that, or would you oppose? Again, 44% people said they would support, and 43% people said they would oppose. Similar sort of, like, it's natural that the older generation basically thinks that if there is a possible of reunification, 60% of them said that they are going to support, whereas among the younger generation it's just 46%. So there is some sort of demographic divide on this question. We also asked things related to Bangladesh and Pakistan partition, but I'm not presenting that finding here. Then we asked people to basically take a stock of not just India, but also their neighbors. The question was, how do you see the overall progress in Pakistan and Bangladesh? And you could see a sharp divide. So Indians think that's like 70% Indians think that we have done really, really well. In case of Bangladesh, that number comes down to 28. And in case of Pakistan, that number is even lower. Just 15% of the population think that Pakistan has made some progress in 75 years. We asked other questions about what Indian thinks about their neighbors as well as wider world. We asked, do you trust these countries? So we asked, do you trust Russia? Do you trust US, Bangladesh, China, and Pakistan? And what we find here, that the trust level for Russia and US remains robust and high, but for China and Pakistan is very, very low. Less than 1 in 5 Indians trust China and Pakistan. For Pakistan, the numbers are really low, 14%. Finally, I would like to conclude here something, there are signs of changing India, but there are also signs of static India. So the first graph, basically we asked people, would you like to do a government job? Or would you like to have your own business or profession? Because for a very, very long period, we have been thinking that, there are always seeing lakhs and millions of applications for even like just 100 posts advertised by the government of India or state governments. For the first time, and I don't know whether this is a blip in the survey, because to know that this is a consistent pattern, for the first time, choice for government jobs seems to be going down. People prefer to have their own business or basically do private sector jobs. Is this a new trend? Something I would like my panelists to reflect. Finally, we asked people a battery of questions. Whether women in household need to take permission of husband or other family members to do following activities, to go to a political meeting, to take up a job, to make decisions on household savings, to go out for shopping, to wear clothes of their choice. And on all these indicators, the gender norms in India seems to remain strict, where a majority of women say that they need permission of the husband or household members to do these things. And the norms are, not surprisingly, stricter in the rural areas. One last thing, and we have not presented here, and Sharanya would be happy to know, that in the survey, we have asked question on who is the most famous cricketer, who's the most famous singer, and also who's the most famous actor across 3 continents. And at some point, I'll give you the number, not just who is the most famous actor, but also the gender breakdown and other things. So with this, I would like to invite my panelists, Kerry, Sharanya, Yashwant, Pallavi, and also CPR President, Comrade in Arms, Yamini Iyer, to release this report. 3, 2, 1, go. So my first question is related to these contradictory or seemingly not contradictory findings in the survey. That on one hand, Indians are celebratory about many things, yet they are also concerned about these things. So first question is this a survey design effect, meaning the kind of questions you are asking? On some questions, people are responding in some ways, and on other questions, people are responding other ways? Or because you poll almost every day, you know where things are and what's the pulse of the nation on some of these things?
Thank you, Rahul. Well, it's not a design effect for sure. I mean, what we say generally from the analysis perspective, that it's contradictory, but it is not. I mean, let's face it, all of us have this somewhere huge gray area in our thought process. On many things we are in binary, but in lot many places we tend to get looking at the overarching, what the picture is and understanding the way it is. And sometimes it is difficult even to say in these numbers. For example, one very classical question was in another report which we did for India Today, the 15th August issue, is the democracy in danger in India? And there was like 49% saying yes. And there was like kind of big headline, okay, 49% saying yes. And I was kind of puzzled that, okay, can I have the cross tabs and understand where is this emotion coming from? Because the idea, that first thing that was coming out from such a data is that people who are unhappy with the things that are around, people who are unhappy with the government or the way this government is going around, and so on and so forth, and they would be saying, okay, democracy is in danger. But it was weird to figure out half of the people who were saying that democracy is in danger were big-time BJP and Modi supporters. So their way of looking at the things democracy is in danger, say for example CAA and RC, when they look at it, one portion of it looks at it, okay, this law is wrong and democracy is in danger. Another one feels the government is too soft. Why are they even allowing these many highways to be blocked? And they are not being strong enough, so democracy is in danger. So everybody has its own way of saying why the democracy is in danger. And as long as I feel that they are feeling democracy is in danger, democracy is not in danger. That's how I look at it. Okay. Similarly, each and every question in this report, and I must say, just thank to Sutanu, who is not here. Unfortunately, his mom is really sick. He's in hospital. Sutanu Guru, my colleague, when he designed this thing, he came to me that, okay, let's do something like 75 questions in the 75th year. and I discussed with Rahul. The only thing which I have added to this one, that I said, why limit it to India? Let's go for Pakistan and Bangladesh, because nobody has actually in the last 75 years run a questionnaire across the three states asking the same questions. And what I feel, contradiction is not just in about how we are evaluating ourselves, how we are looking at the others, and similar kind of trend, whatever the data we have collected in Bangladesh and Pakistan so far, the more I feel we are different, I feel we are very much the same. But it is really humbling to accept now that a big number of the new generation feels what has happened has happened. It's done and dusted. There is no more nostalgia of, oh, it was something which was wrong. They said, okay, got it done, fine, move ahead. And that emotion of being pragmatic, being, shall I say, I will not say non-emotional, but yeah, I mean being practical enough to say that coming together is not really something which people, the youngsters are very happy about. They see the practical problem, and then they can also sense there is a very distinct understanding of economy in that. That why they feel going or having a friendship with Pakistan is a bad economic decision, and they feel good about Bangladesh. When you looked at the question, how much do you trust? Now, trusting, first of all, let me be very clear. Indians do trust Russia because of our old ties. They trust US. But Indians do not trust anybody blindly. They have stopped trusting any bugger under the sun that these are pro-India. They are saying very clearly, anybody is talking pro-India, it's because we are talking pro-India. So, and it's not about this government or that government, it's just about the new confidence. But they are trusting Bangladesh, 50%. When you look at the Pakistan number at 13% and compare it to their trust on Bangladesh, it's very unique to understand that way. While we know that in the entire political discourse, Bangladesh sentiment has been hammered on illegal Bangladeshis and all that. But still that kind of emotion is there. So these contradictions are going to be there, but I believe they are healthy contradictions.
Great. Pallavi, just building on what Yashwant Bhai just said, which is, Indians show some sort of trust for old partners such as Russia, and perhaps now that India is growing closer to US in some circles, they also trust them, but not their immediate neighbors, China, Pakistan, or Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And second, so as a professor of international relations, does public opinion matter in any way how foreign policy or international relations is conducted? Or it's basically something where public may have some interest or some say, but those who have to make decisions actually don't listen to public on these things?
Thank you, Rahul, and firstly, thank you so much for doing the report, which is so beautifully brought out, and for having us on the panel. And I wouldn't go so far as having a straightforward yes or no to your question, in that I don't think that policy making on international affairs, carries out regardless of what the public thinks. But I think it may be a case of like a self-perpetuating kind of loop, in that the public will be more favored to having a good perception of a country if there's a history of, dialogue and relationship and bilateral negotiation with that country. So I think, they're related, and I think that, in the sense that the public perception of a country is also to do with how the government perceives it, which is also to do with how the public perceives it. So particularly on Pakistan, I feel like this is partly what's going on. That the way in which we perceive Pakistan is also to do with the history of how the governments have perceived each other in the past.
But just to add there, so do you think, given that there is a deep distrust on China and Pakistan, even politicians, those who are in power, would not go for building any friendly ties because there is deep animosity? Or can politics change that in public? Or public sentiment is going to drive that kind of relationship?
Yeah, I'm always struck by how, regardless of all the kind of individually, how much I may politically disagree with whatever political party I'm dealing with, or whatever person I'm dealing with from whichever political party. But I am always struck by how there is a real underlying steel kind of sense of pragmaticism, which kind of which does make itself evident in the way in which politicians talk about Pakistan. And particularly when you talk to them off the record, or when you just ask them what's going to happen, there is a way in which, what's surprising is that the relationship of hostility and warfare and animosity that we've had for wars, the partition itself. There are very strong reasons to have a suspicious relationship with the other. Given that backdrop, what is surprising is the lack of a particularly kind of volatile or a particularly kind of visceral reaction toward Pakistan. And there's a sense in which there is also a sense in which there's a feeling that, look, it's always worth pragmatically kind of considering the possibilities of a more fruitful relationship with Pakistan. So I feel like that is also a factor in the way that we should see Pakistan.
Thank you, Pallavi. Gary, and let me tell everyone, Gary is India Bureau Chief of Washington Post, and before this, he was in China for 6 years. And so my question to you, Gary, now that you travel India, what do you think of these perceptions of Indians about themselves? Is this survey capturing what you see from sort of like, an outsider's perspective in that sense? What is your, reflections on some of these findings?
Sure. I guess my initial thought, especially looking at some of the very interesting findings, for example, if you guys look at page 17, what people think about India's economic prospects, it's actually overwhelmingly, I would say, probably with the exception of Muslims, SCs, it's pretty positive. Indians' views of other things, for example, the state of its infrastructure, it's also, to me, it's surprisingly positive. And I think for me, looking at the results of this survey was both surprising and not surprising. I think not surprising in that if we were to look at the arc of India's development over 75 years, if we were to look at all the superlatives that we could use to describe India today, fifth largest economy in the world, third largest military budget, it's definitely sort of a formidable player on the world stage. Look at the National Family Health Surveys, and women's literacy has gone up, and child marriages have gone down. I mean, there's a lot of things to sort of point to say, look, this is a country that's broadly heading in the right direction. At the same time, is it falling far short of where it should be? And has the performance of this country in the last 10 years been going downwards? You can also make a very strong case that it has, right? Labor participation has gone down from 46 to 40% since 2016. India has been overshadowed completely in terms of its manufacturing sector and its exports. It was the same as Vietnam in 2010, and by 2020, Vietnam reached $120 billion, and India's at $15 billion. Bangladesh was half of India's GDP per capita in, I think, 2007, and today, as of a year ago, it's exceeded it. And yet, when we look at popular opinion, when we see how UP voted, right, this year, despite what we saw in terms of the handling of COVID, and I don't doubt for a second that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is vastly popular in this country. I think that the sort of the only explanation that we can have is that there are, I think, factors that inform how people view the direction of their country and the performance of their leadership. There are factors that go into that beyond simply, governance, beyond stewardship of the economy and development. And I think at the end of the day, it does, things like nationalism make a huge difference. And there are, and it is hugely effective to sort of pull on those levers. You had mentioned that I spent 6 years in China, and I would say that, certainly when things got rough in China, we also saw the Communist Party sort of turn to nationalism as a way to sort of bolster its support. At the same time, I think in China, there is also a certain caution about kind of continuing to hit that button. It's you don't want to, as I said in the movie Scarface, sort of, get high off your own supply, right? And kind of, it's, nationalism is a powerful tool to rally the people when you're disunited, to sort of give you a shot when you feel down, but the higher you fly, the harder you fall, right? And so, and the CCP even in many times, I think, had the sense that if this is something dangerous, this is something that we need to sort of, to dial back and not let get out of hand. And indeed it was, I think, that sense of over-optimism coming out of the great financial crisis that led China to a lot of, I think, large strategic mistakes and overreach that they're now paying the price for and are suffering a lot. And so, it's great to see India develop. It's great to see the kind of the optimism reflected in these surveys. But at the same time, I think we have to sort of be realistic in looking at sort of the state of Indian development today.
Thank you. Sharanya, I'll ask you about Shah Rukh Khan later. But right now, as you are also an economist at the World Bank, let's focus on some of the questions related to economy, because I'm a bit perplexed, which is there's showing signs of concern over poverty, unemployment, at least very introspective on when we've asked about quality of roads, quality of water, how far your nearest health facility is. Yet, what is this optimism about? That we have done remarkably well in 75 years, and especially, what do you think? And you must be looking at other indicators and data about this trend, which we see in this survey, that people are now ready to own businesses and take up private jobs. What does this say about new Indians and new India?
Yeah, firstly, thanks, Rahul, and congratulations on the report. Actually, before I answer your question, I want to say one thing, which is I think the idea of running the same questions across the region is really powerful because, you can coalesce and create coalitions around some of these facts. So I really want to sort of commend and congratulate the team. Rahul, the economy is sort of this faceted beast depending on where you are looking at it from, right? We know that if you look at the perspective of informal workers right now, and the IMF, organizations like the World Bank have been talking about India's K-shaped recovery, which still, there's a concern that you essentially have certain groups that are doing quite well. There's leisure consumption has really started increasing. And yet, if you look at the informal economy, informal workers, which is actually the large chunk of the labor force, you have indebtedness. There's still the lack of an adequate stimulus to create a safety net. Transfers are perhaps not enough. And the economy looks very different, I think, depending on where you are. So I think that's one thing. I think even when you try and capture all of this into sort of one set of statistics, and even when you look at crosstabs or different variations, I sense that you will perhaps pick up variations based on jobs, profiles, geospatial, and I encourage the team to, and I think others who are going to be looking at the data, to do that. Now, having said that, one of the things is, when you ask people, is it better than what you expected or worse than what you expected? Expectations set up endogeneity, right? Because one thing that has happened, particularly post-liberalization, is essentially the facet that expectations have also just boomed. And so, for example, I was curious when I was looking at the economic prospects. Can I just continue? Yeah. When I was looking at the economic prospects table, I was thinking, it'd be interesting actually also to see this by gender because, I'm curious whether women and men, and maybe you have an answer for this already. I'm very curious about that because at the end of the day, whether something is better than what you expected, worse than what you expected, is very much benchmarked around where your expectations are. And I would argue across age, and I think you alluded to this in your initial comments, across age we see this very big intergenerational shift in expectations. And I suspect some of that you're picking up and almost collapsing into one statistic. And you might start to see very different trends when you look at it, perhaps looking at age-wise, gender-wise, and so on and so forth. Now, with that, on the job market, I was surprised actually to see the sort of drop in interest in government jobs, and I share some of your surprise there. But if I marry that, and I see people who are also shaking their heads rigorously, and I am surprised by that because, for example, if you look at the latest PLFS data, again, you see largely, and I think the report mentions this, because of social security. It's not necessarily just the wage level or the type of job, or perhaps, I think people now realize that actually looking at the contractual nature also of lots of state jobs, the jobs are not as, they are no longer the jobs of the government or the sarkari job of the 80s or the 90s, right? Things have really changed. But the call to social security and a very clear package of a good job that provides you provident funds, a certain set of benefits, which, let's face it, 80% of Indians are outside the net of. So given that, I'm a bit surprised that we're seeing this shift. If the shift continues, and I do see amongst young people the interest, and certainly young women, I see the interest to set up businesses of your own or be self-employed, but that's largely because you require flexibility in the way you're allocating your labor. I am surprised at this sort of decline, and of course the share of interest in private sector jobs remains really small. It's actually this big shift towards the self-employed. If this is actually the case, one thing that one would have to think very carefully about is, do we really have the policy levers right now to facilitate all of this without an adequate net or even a livelihood stimulus that the government has yet to really roll out? We have all these incentive-linked schemes, but there's really nothing in terms of transfers, and I think the policy space becomes very different. So I am surprised by that, but I think I'm not surprised by the numbers on, yes, the economy is doing well, yes, infrastructure is great. I'm also not surprised that it's very layered. It's not surprising that certain communities don't think that the prospects of the economy are great, and I think it is because expectations are endogenous. I think there is something about asking a set of people, is this better than worse than? People's expectations are going to be in different places. I think you're picking that up in the information. The last thing I will say, though, on the job market, which is very interesting to me in this report, was that, you see this permission culture that women seem to just be immersed in. I actually think that the numbers perhaps don't do justice to some of the improvements that I do think have occurred in gender relations in very sort of experiential, you see across generations, mothers would be fully covered and then now daughters don't wear dupattas. There are differences, you see them, and maybe these are things that you can't pick up statistically, but you see them around us in our culture, in our day-to-day life. I don't think the numbers fully perhaps reflect that. But having said that, I mean, the fact that even in the south of India, in fact, it's higher. I saw the number. There's a question here about, do you need permission to wear, what clothes that you want to? And I was really surprised, actually not that surprised, to see that South India, actually, women require more permission than even the north now. And this is not surprising because now Kerala and Rajasthan report very similar female employment rates. So, given where we are, I think the real question when I was looking at this is, to me, the economic story is very deeply tied up in this permission culture story. If women are not allowed to just express themselves, explore opportunities, everything is a constant cognitive tax of seeking permission. How are you going to be a productive individual engaging with the market? And that leaves me with, actually, I'm not particularly optimistic when I look at those numbers. But I think on the economy as a whole, the expectation stuff doesn't really surprise me given what I said about expectations. But I think the push on government jobs and self-employed, I'm still a bit puzzled by. Maybe others can share more. But the message I am taking away looking at the findings of this report is the need of a robust and adequate safety net, which is currently not existing. And you're seeing it actually picking up in the preferences for jobs and the kinds of aspirations I think people are voicing in the data. And Shah Rukh Khan is, of course, going to be number one, of course, but I'll stop there.
Pallavi, let me sort of like pick some of the things that Sharanya said, especially on the women question, which is that on the question related to political ambition, on the question related to vote efficacy and vote voice, and there are many other indicators. There is actually a positive story on the women question, where if they are not higher political ambition, they are matching it up, right? And not just in this survey, but also other surveys that have happened in recent past. There are indicators that young women are basically not shying away from basically like calling up for their position. What is your reflection on this finding and in general on the gender question? Because things seem to be changing, but changing very slowly.
Yeah, Yeah, things do seem to be changing, but I think, I mean, a lot of this is quite flatly predicated by where, according to class and access and income, you know. And I think, I mean, you do need to kind of, like, there is probably no way of making like a flat kind of categorization of women, you know, like I think that may not exist, and it's probably what kind of women, where does she live, how much does she earn, how much access has she had, and therefore what does she want, you know. I, for example, teach in a university in Sonipat, when I drive to work, like I see, you know, completely different, stories of, I mean, I see, you know, like a completely different kind of reality that that rural women kind of live in. And, one of the things I'm always a little bit struck by is my students sort of say that, look, that women in India must be slightly better off than women in our neighborhoods, simply because we have a electoral democracy, and so that must make, just the fact of being able to participate in the electoral process must give you a little bit more empowerment. And I'm always saying to them and asking them to at least think it over in terms of, look, a woman in Sonipat, Haryana, when she's out on the fields and when she's sort of, working in backbreaking poverty, really the reality of her life, like how different can it be from somewhere in, in Sindh or Balochistan, or and should we not start thinking about women according to, where they're coming from, as, I mean, and as, should we not start thinking about how, things that transcend nationality may give more ways of thinking of women, I mean, maybe more helpful in helping us think about their position, as opposed to things that kind of define them just according to, identity, nationality. So yeah.
Thank you. Kerry, since you, in your previous remark, mentioned about China and nationalism and leadership there, you may have seen in the report that, and you also mentioned, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is extremely popular in the survey. In fact, we asked a question, who is the most popular Prime Minister since independence, and Modi just tops the chart. And the next person is Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and then Indira Gandhi and Nehru and Manmohan Singh. What is your reflection on, in these few months, what do you think Modi's popularity is built on? And second, is this just a, recency effect, in a sense that you are doing this survey in time when Modi is the Prime Minister, and a large number of support is because he's currently the Prime Minister? If you do this survey 10 years later or 20 years later, when it's not the Prime Minister, these numbers will sort of average out.
No, I mean, I think that, his popularity is genuine, and it's certainly in the sort of the questions and the results here. I mean, it certainly does capture the kind of the political shift in the country, right? Mahatma Gandhi, the greatest South Asian. There's a sort of a pretty clear increase in as you get younger, there are more people who disagree that he is the greatest South Asian. Nehru's popularity is absolutely dwarfed by Modi's. I mean, I think some of these things, it's not just a recency balance. Bias. I do think that, for whatever you think of his policies, I mean, he certainly has built a very formidable political base that spans not only the upper castes, but basically through the top and bottom of Indian society, and that's I think pretty irrefutable at this point, and it's absolutely reflected when I go out and travel the country and I talk to people. When the sort of, I guess, the Indian right sometimes kind of, sneeringly makes the criticism that it's just the con market crowd that kind of opposes them. There's some truth to that, right? And let's not. I think I'm being a little bit facetious, but I think it's his support is real. We can have an argument over whether is it sort of objectively well grounded, but that's a different debate.
Thank you. Sharanya, let me ask you a quick question. because you have two printed copies of the report, and I'm guessing you have gone through this report twice. We asked a question to people, which is, what kind of identity you feel closer to. If you meet a person who speaks your language, do you feel closer to that person, or you feel closer to a person who comes from your religion? And surprisingly, language is the tie which people feel more closer to. And given that there is so much conversation in South Asian context, especially in India, that religion is the binding force and caste is the binding force, and everyone does whatever they do in the name of religion and caste, what is your reflection on this linguistic identity, and anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, Rahul, actually, I'll respond to your question. I just had one follow-up to what Pallavi was saying, but let me start by responding to you. I did actually see that. I haven't read the report twice, but I read it thoroughly once. One of the things that was very interesting, I feel that, so for example, social identities tend to be much more salient when it's sort of a political marketplace, right? I mean, and we see that. Everything that you've been doing tells us that. But I think when it comes to economic marketplaces and arbiters of general culture, conversation, solidarity networks, perhaps given the churn in the country and also this mingling, right? I hear this joke that now half of Bangalore is basically Punjabis, and for good and for bad. I think given what's happening in the economy, given that jobs are clustered in certain areas, it requires people to migrate, it changes, and people are code switching. And I think you're seeing that. So when people say, I feel a sense of affinity, sure, you feel a sense of affinity in your day-to-day interactions, perhaps particularly in the economy, in the marketplace of jobs and ideas. But I still feel, and I think your data does, I'm looking at this also in the context of some other information that's coming out, I've seen recently, essentially that social identities still remain so salient and are binding barriers when it comes to bridging political marketplaces, right? And thinking about coalitions. So take, for example, and when you say language, now of course that's become incredibly, it's a contentious issue now, given I think we're debating who speaks what language. But you'll see that a lot of the opposition actually to this idea of forcing a language is not just political, but it's also, you'll see it in the private sector, because the idea of these kinds of identities essentially arbitrating an already inefficient labor market is actually a source of tremendous concern. So while I think the findings here, and I think the question is asked in a more broad-based way, I see it, and I think it's very salient in the economic space, but I still feel that when it comes to political identities, we're still in that world of caste, religion. I think those things continue to be very, very important. Quickly, I think to Pallavi's point, I mean, I take the point that, gender norms and how you experience womanhood and this permission culture is very different based on class, caste, region, all of that. But I do think, India, it's 75 years of our independence, but I think every Indian woman is still fighting her personal independence struggle. We are fighting against norms of safety. Just even for me or for you, Pallavi, we were talking about this just before, finding a house on our own, accessing ancillary markets for even elite upper caste women is so hideously difficult. We're far from independent. And I mean, now I think I say this, and I know it upsets some people when I say this in public forums, but independence was for men, liberalization was for men. Women drew benefits from it in a very indirect way, perhaps. 19% of jobs post-liberalization went to men, and the highest growing, 19% of those jobs went to women, so majority went to men. And given that context, I think across class, there is space, I think, for mobilization around gender, in a political space as well, across class, because this feeling of not feeling safe, not being valued, having to struggle to access basic markets, my sense is this is something every woman across class, caste, religion is facing. And exactly, and nationality. And I really do think that this is a struggle, it's an independent struggle. All women are really, I think all of us are sort of in this together. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Last question to Yashwant. Since you've been looking data for now as old as I am.
Okay.
I just wanted to feel young, right? Okay. The reason why I'm asking, there is a lot of conversation happening on growing polarization in India. And we see that in our report. And the reason why I think you are the best person to answer this, because we don't really have data on polarization in the past, right? So you can have some sense of what's happening in the present, but you can't, without data, measure that. In the survey, and just for everyone here, we asked question whether democracy in India has increased in last 10 years, remained the same in last 10 years, or declined in last 10 years. There is division. A lot of people feel democracy has in fact increased, as you also alluded in your opening remarks, because people think about democracy in different ways. But those numbers are divided by, if you are asking, if you dissect the data by who people tend to politically identify with. So BJP voters are going to say something compared to non-BJP voter. Not just on the democracy question, on the leadership question, so who like, and that's obvious, right? Like BJP voters are going to like Modi and Vajpayee, but also on overall progress, right? So on most indicators, partisan identification seems to be emerging as a dividing line, and that is basically what is like partisanship or polarization is. How do you sort of like read this, and then we open the floor for everyone to ask questions?
Well, it's complicated, let me say this, because people at large have always amazed me, with their collective wisdom or whichever way. Because I'm a big fan of always honoring the mandates, let me tell you. I am post-emergency generation, have suffered during the emergency. So, and whenever I teach to my classes, and I always tell them that, when you are looking at the impact of the social media and blah, blah, and you feel every time that mandate, any particular mandate is actually affected because of that. None, zilch. 77 election, when the entire opposition was in jail, there was not even polling agents on the polling booth, there was no TV, media was completely censored, all India radio, no rallies. People go out quietly and they defeat even Mrs. Gandhi in Raebareli. Arguably the same population which was almost like 60% plus illiterate. 1977 we are talking. And yet we have this, the most pragmatic of the mandates in the history of democracy, if I may say so. There is no parallel in world history, no parallel whatsoever, of 1977 elections in India. I can challenge you. Give me one example. So people of India, with their collective way of thinking, their thought process, they've always amazed me. Always. And when we ask questions on a daily basis on so many things that they are happening, and on the issues of polarization. So, for example, I will give you a very quickly, I think last week only we had a question on the survey of the madrasas and all that. Okay. Now, should the madrasas be surveyed in UP? A big chunk? No. But should the elaborate be surveyed across India? Big chunk, yes. So the problem is not if there should be a survey of any irregularity in any madrasa or anywhere. Problem is that selective. Why only in this state? Why with this agenda? All right. And to my surprise, big number of Muslims said we have no issues with the survey if it is done all India. Because, Khalid, who is our output editor, I was kind of, and Mananji is here, he is our stats editor, and I keep on talking to them because, of course, I need to understand what is going on. And they tell me, sir, you would be surprised कि वफ़ के नाम पे कितनी प्रॉपर्टी लोगों ने हड़प के रखी है. Even the Muslims deadly want that कि यार इसको खत्म करो. So there are so many layers of that thing, and particularly in today's world, as far as we are talking about this social media-led polarization, the cancel culture, there is no middle ground. All right, you are either with us, you are against us. And everybody is forced by the algorithms to take positions. And what we see in social media is completely different what is actually on the ground. I run a Twitter poll, and you see South Pole and North Pole, nobody in the equator. When we run the real poll, there is a huge majority on the equator. So somewhere down the line, I also feel that we are confusing this virtual world as the real world, which is, thankfully, it is not the same. Thankfully, it is not the same. So that's a good news for you. Second thing you asked me, I mean, we are perpetually optimistic society. Somehow we are always high. We are a contextual society, always high. But something tells me, Rahul, that I can sense that source of optimism is in the gender equation. You are right that we have a long way to go, but carefully look at the number on your question on the political participation. Females are saying more they wish to participate than the males. And this only maybe 1 or 2%, but coming from the context that 60 years in this country, the female turnout was almost more than 10 points less than the male turnout. And in the last 10 years, they have not only covered that 10 point, they are now over that. It's a big magical thing out there that is happening. And to answer your question, yes, if you look into, first of all, on the government jobs thing, I think there is I won't say pessimism, but realistic realization, there are actually no government jobs, number one. Number two, the government jobs are not the same kind of government job that it used to be. And if you look into very detail, the bottom of the society, the low income group is still holding on कि मुझे एक सरकारी नौकरी मिल जाए because of the sense of safety. But the real change is in the middle class. That big middle class, and within that middle class, it is the females who are churning. That they want to go for that entrepreneurship for various reasons. That first of all, they would not like to go for a regular 9-to-5 job or something like that. There is a huge number of highly educated, skilled females being restricted as housewives. All right? And thanks to COVID, because when everything was shut down, we had to go for decentralized CATI. And now I'm telling you, Rahul, majority of our researchers are females. And I am happy to say so because their output is 2 times better than our male researchers.
Sir, there are some sitting here.
Yeah. And they know. I keep on telling them in my office. I keep on telling them. I mean, that's what the fact is. Also because of the fact that female respondents answer better to female researchers. That is right. But the effort that these girls put in, because for them it is that chance to prove themselves. They want to do it. They want to prove themselves. And that is where I feel the next 75 years story of India is going to come from. It is an India which will be looking into a brighter future because of the females of India. I'm absolutely convinced about it. There is no two opinion about it. So that is where your entire spectrum of whatever. But I would certainly love to see if we have the similar equations in Pakistan or in Bangladesh. Something tells me that in Bangladesh we might be having it. Pakistan, I'm not sure because I'm still not very sure what kind of response rate would be. That would be a challenge. That is going to be a challenge. But overall, yes. And on your question of language thing, Rahul, I live in Dubai. I invariably come across with my cab drivers who are from Pakistan. And I have this habit of talking. I'm sampling guy, I keep on interviewing people. बात करता हूँ, क्या चल रहा है, क्या नहीं चल रहा है. 2 minutes in the conversation and the guy says to me every time, आपकी जनाब उर्दू मुझसे बहुत अच्छी है. यार मैं लखनऊ का हूँ. मेरी दिक्कत यह है कि मुझे मालूम है कि पाकिस्तान में उर्दू कोई नहीं बोलता. जो उर्दू बोलते हैं वो हमारे मलियाबाद से गए हैं, जिनको तुमने मुहाजिर बना के रखा है. So language of course is an issue, big time. And the language happened because Bangladesh happened. That's the root thing over there. So there is affinity and there is a cultural aspect to it. And again over there, I believe that your question of asking permissions, Rahul, I genuinely believe that probably in the next round of World Value Surveys thing that we will be operating, I might add few questions on that. I need to understand whether asking for a permission when the females say that we ask for a permission, whether it is a necessity anymore to a large number or whether it is a value-driven thing that they wish to respect and honor and that say that, okay, yes, I asked my dad, I asked my thing, how much of that not in everywhere, but at least in the urban middle class, how much is that the really thing? Yes, I understand that the day-to-day struggle, but that value change is also happening somewhere.
Pallavi, just like, so 1 minute, both of you, and then I need to get other people.
Yeah, I wish to, I was, when you were talking about how, I was thinking about, you referred to the various positions of Muslims in India, and one of the things I was just also wanted to flag was, one of the things that your survey did bring out was one of the ways in which this whole issue is litigated is through resuscitation of the partition debates, and I feel like I feel like it's really interesting that, I used to say that, look, I used to be a grad student a decade ago, and I used to tell people I worked at the partition, and at that stage, it wasn't necessarily something that people they thought it was nice, but it wasn't necessarily relevant. And there's something going on in the domestic politics of India at the moment that has made partition, this event that happened 75 years ago, front and center into daily life today. And I think we need to probe that more deeply, because I think, there's two sets of things that are happening, right? One is what happened 75 years ago to our grandparents. And second is how that is being remembered now and utilized for political processes, which are not necessarily authentically reflecting the truth of what happened, right? So what the people coming out of the partition experience were saying about India-Pakistan relations, or about partition as a whole, or whether it should have happened, may not necessarily tally so well with how we reflect on partitions today. And there's probably a reason to, the reason for that is probably the compulsions of politics today in India rather than anything else.
Let's take a few questions. Anyone, any question? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Padmini. So I really got interested with the whole permission culture thing, and so I've been working with self-help group women, okay, and in that context, I wanted to understand how you all, the whole NRLM, National Rural Livelihood Mission, self-help group network movement as a whole has changed the permission culture dynamic, because I have seen rural women fighting for, going outside and working, and now governments ranging from the Assam government, which has gone out and given scooties to all community cadres of ASRLM, to Jivika Nitish Kumar doing his bit, to Kudumbashri in Kerala. They're like, women are out there. And I have seen through individual stories how they have gone beyond seeking permission from their families. So in this whole context of permission culture, I wanted to understand how you're looking at this whole self-help group movement and how that has changed the dynamics of women, inter-household dynamics of women and the whole thing.
थैंक यू राहुल. तीन छोटे सवाल हैं. एक
सर एक सवाल
बहुत छोटे हैं, एक ही में ही तीन है. एक जो लैंग्वेज वाला आपने कहा कि टुगेदरनेस को लेके थोड़ा सा उस पर और प्रकाश डालें कि क्या वो लोकेलिटी को लेके कुछ अलग नंबर. विमेन पार्टिसिपेशन को लेके पार्टिसिपेशन बढ़ रहा है, अगर उसमें आप लोग में से कोई ये दें कि मोटिवेशन क्या है, मतलब क्या चीज़ प्रोवोक करा है कि पार्टिसिपेशन बढ़ रहा है. और तीसरा डायरेक्टली यशवंत जी से, उन्होंने 1977 का इलेक्शन का एग्जांपल लिया. मैं सहमत हूँ आपकी बात से. बस एक चीज़ है कि उस समय जो सरकार पावरफुल, आपने कहा कि मीडिया नहीं थी, फिर भी लोगों ने वोट किया. आज के दौर में हम लोग भी इलेक्शन कवर करते, तो एक बहुत चीज़ आती है पनप की. बहुत सारे लोग जो फ्लोटिंग वोटर, जिसको हम लोग कैटेगराइज करते, कि विनेबिलिटी देखते हैं कि ये जीत रहे इसलिए वोट दे रहे, या ये नहीं जीतेंगे इसलिए वोट नहीं. तो वो जो विनेबिलिटी का फैक्टर जो उनके पास इंफॉर्मेशन पर पहुंच रहा है, वो कैसे पहुंच रहा है, उसको आप कैसे देखते हैं? थैंक यू.
Of which I'd like your opinion. So on this question of businesses, you see, there's a finding across the world. I did my study years ago on sex workers in Thailand, that human capital doesn't empower gender. It doesn't gender empower. It reinforces gender disabilities. Physical capital empowers. So could this be a reason why women are not just keeping up with hours, but actually maybe we kick the man in the butt? If you have to accept that serious capital. The other information I wanted was how regionally diverse is this preference or lack of it for government jobs? Because I'm sure it's gone up in Gujarat because they seem to put on but the other parts of the country also has increased.
Thank you, sir. Compliment Rahul for such a beautiful presentation and the study. I have a very quick question. One is that did you carry out a design of experiment to distribute the samples so that you are able to equalize it? Because I'll give you one example of partition. If you go to the older generation, they will say partition was absolutely criminal. And if you go to the younger generation, they don't know. So there is a question of time. There is a temporal element in the whole study. That also applies to the popularity of a private. If you ask the older generation, they'll say the actual God was Jawaharlal Nehru. When if you go now, you know what is the obvious answer. And how did you really come across the popularity of the film stars, whether it is Akshay Kumar and Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, as the lady said. Thank you.
As long as sitting beside sir,
See, all his films are bombed. All the film bombed on the box office, but he is still popular.
Okay.
I want to just quickly take the notion of permission culture. What we see, and there's the latest NFHS data has also come out, there's huge community infrastructure which is women-led. ASHA workers, overworked ASHA workers, underpaid, protesting almost every month. Similarly, SHG groups now being asked, in fact, in the morning I was on a panel and we were talking about how for all digital payments, everything now we expect SHG groups to do all the work, underpaid, not really well remunerated. When it comes to businesses, and I'd mentioned this in my comments to Rahul, women do like to have, there's a preference for self-employment and home-based work. Partly it's an asset issue, but largely it remains a flexibility of care work and productive work issue. But even there, if you look at self-employment, the PLFS just released now shows self-employed women earn about a third of what men's businesses do. So you see these huge gaps persisting. Part of it is this permission culture of, can I access credit? Can I find a house? Can I travel? I'm a big supporter of these ideas of, be it a transport voucher or direct incentives to women to enter and direct incentives to the private sector to reward more women entering. So while there is this community infrastructure, and of course you see all kinds of studies and there's a lot of scholarship on this about what it means for women's sense of self-esteem and how women are seen in the immediate community. In the economy, we're still in the bottom 5 of the world, with only Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan as our neighbor, with us in that bottom 5. So the wage gaps and the access to sort of sustain good jobs isn't really relaxing. And I think for that, you need private sector incentives and a lot more work on at least the demand for women's labor in the private sector. I'll stop there.
Just one answer of your regional variation in the entrepreneurship idea and all that. There is one variable in data which I kind of try to study, and I realized that middle class is a new thing altogether across the regions. So now we have a middle class value regardless of the caste, region, language, community, whatever way you can look at it. So that is a very unique thing that is happening, and that is taking even the politics beyond caste and this thing. Because all I can tell you that in the last 10 years, I have only seen traditional equations of doing politics in India getting in the dustbin. Every election after election after election. आपने एक सवाल बंधु जो पूछा 77 वाला और उसके बाद वाला, उसका दो चीज़ें मैं कहना चाहूँगा। 98 के चुनाव में हमने एग्जिट पोल में एक सवाल अलग से डाला था केवल महिलाओं के लिए कि आपने वोट जो डाला वो किसके कहने पे डाला। खुद की चॉइस थी, पति के, पिता के, भाई के, घर वालों के, बाकी almost 2/3. And we are talking 1998, which is not really that back in time. Almost 2/3 in Delhi at that point of time. I'm talking about national capital Delhi. They said that घर वालों के कहने पे डाला. Cut to today, ये सवाल पूछने की भी ज़रूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि बिल्कुल साफ पता लगता है कि औरतों ने किस चीज़ पे वोट डाला और किसको वोट डाला, और पुरुषों ने। अभी उत्तर प्रदेश के जो चुनाव हुए, जो इश्यूज महिलाओं के थे, वो राशन मिल रहा है, शौचालय बना है, घर बना है। जो इशू पुरुषों के थे, मंदिर बन रहा है, बुलडोजर चल रहा है। यार, come to think of it, females are voting on rationally on the real issues. And males of this country are struck 75 years back, I guess. That's why I am saying the next 75 years is this India's story, is the female story. It is the gender story which is going to take. And I'm very clear, it's the data which is telling me. And no matter what, आप कुछ भी कहिए कि इलेक्शन के समय में जो प्रचार होता है और कौन, यार पिछले 8 साल में नरेंद्र मोदी इस देश के आधे चुनाव हारा है. आप कभी रियलाइज करते हो इस बात को? You never realize that. BJP has lost 50% of elections in this country in the last 8 years. People have started doing split voting. In this city where we are sitting, BJP gets 7-0, then Kejriwal gets 67 out of 70. BJP again gets 7-0, then Kejriwal manages 65. और अगर आपको बताऊं, अगर ये वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन, जो कि बाय द वे नई चीज नहीं है, 1967 तक अपने यहाँ पे वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन ही था, सारे इलेक्शन एक साथ होते थे. आज इस शहर में एमसीडी, असेंबली और लोकसभा तीनों इलेक्शन के वोट एक साथ पड़े ना, 3 पार्टियों के 3 अलग रिजल्ट आएंगे, मैं आपको लिख के दे सकता हूं. So people are voting not because somebody is telling them WhatsApp यूनिवर्सिटी. सब कुछ ठीक है यार, लोग पढ़ते हैं, आधे से ज़्यादा WhatsApp यूनिवर्सिटी में लोग इसलिए होते हैं कि उस ग्रुप से निकलना जो है लगता है कि लोग नाराज हो जाएंगे कि एग्जिट मार गए. ओके, आधे लोग मजबूरी में देखते नहीं है, उसको साइलेंट मोड में डाल के कर देते हैं. फिर कोई पीछे से अम्मा फोन करके बोलती हैं उनको, उनका तुमने जवाब नहीं दिया. अरे हाँ, देखते हैं कहाँ जवाब देना है. Forget about it. No matter what the misinformation or information campaign is, people of India, they vote the way they wish to vote. That's the bottom line.
Pallavi, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I thought I'd come in on the question on partition. And, again, like the interesting thing, I mean, there's certainly something really interesting going on with the partition debates right now. And this sudden resurgence of interest in trying to relitigate the partition dispute in a way that you didn't see in the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s. And there's suddenly like this mainstream kind of political interest. One of the questions in the survey was, should the partition be reversed, and should the India kind of be able to kind of take over territories that were formed because of the partition. And that kind of agenda is certainly front and center of politics today. And I feel, the thing about this is that I feel like it's not about what happened in 47. It's actually a way of trying to have a conversation about India and Pakistan, and it's an India-Pakistan issue. And I think we have to kind of watch out for that because, if nothing else, like A, it's just historically inaccurate. But B, it's also not necessarily, one of the questions that your survey had asked was, should the partition be reversed? But I would have also been interested to see an answer on, will the state of Pakistan fold? And I think the answers to that second question might have been slightly different from the answers to, should partition be reversed, So I think we need to kind of think through what we're trying to say about partition much more.
Thierry, you want to respond? Anything you want to reflect?
I guess I would just pause for 1 second. I'm not sort of, I understand that at the end of the day, the voters will vote in their best interest, right? They care about, okay, am I, now getting sort of sewage to my house? Am I getting a job? Can I, live well? I don't disagree with that. I do think that we shouldn't underestimate the impact of WhatsApp University, right? I think that we can't just compare sort of the media environment and the social media environment that we have today with the 1970s. Fundamentally, we literally have new technologies in which you are getting fed stuff from people around you. Your beliefs are getting reinforced. Your beliefs that are sort of factual and true, and those that aren't, it's being pumped directly sort of into your pocket. This is something that we've never sort of really kind of dealt with in previous decades. And I think that this is something that we can't if we were to take, I guess what I'm trying to say, to the logical end, which is does democratic politics sort of automatically, without any qualifiers, does it automatically generate the most efficient sort of productive outcome today? in the same way that you could argue, okay, do free markets also sort of, if you just sort of without any kind of regulation, would it generate the most efficient outcome? I think that's something that is up for debate. I just simply sort of, I understand that a government like the ruling government today, it has a clear mandate. Do I think that it is reflective sort of a population that has all the information to make the sort of the independent and objective decision that it is necessarily that these leaders are the ones who will deliver us objectively the best economic and social outcomes? I'm not certain of that. I just want to introduce that bit of doubt.
My apologies, I won't be able to take any more questions because female force on both sides are warning me that the time is up and the clock only shows 2 minutes. So I'll just give 30 seconds to each of my panelists to say the last word, starting with Pallavi, and then we close this conversation. But all of them are going to be outside. You can catch them, ask them questions. Pallavi, 30 seconds, anything.
Thank you very much for doing the survey. And for myself, I'm really curious to see the next slot, the next installment of the survey, which brings in responses from our neighboring countries. Like, I'm interested to see the responses to that.
Ditto.
Thank you. And I think just picking up on the optimism around gender, I'm hopeful that I think we need to think about a world in which men support women's care work a lot more, and that perhaps needs to be measured. Without that, you're not going to see any of the political changes translate into economic changes. And I hope that's my hope, and that's my actually hope for measurement, better measurement as well. Thanks.
Okay, you have any.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul, for the very enlightening survey, and thanks you guys as well. I learned a lot really about the gender issues, and it was really sort of mind-opening for me. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Just one announcement. This report would be published on CPR and C-Voter website next Monday, so you can freely download this. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, please send it to us. The next iteration of the survey, or whenever we manage to do something, like we do plan to do a comparative study by the end of the year, and so your suggestions and feedback would be really helpful. Thank you again for patiently listening to us for over an hour and a half. Thank you.